at 7:43 on the 2nd of January, 1945. Sergeant Jack Marquis' hands grip the turret controls of his M4A3E8 Sherman Jumbo as the tank lurches through the narrow streets of Manhay, Belgium. The village is smoke-stained and broken. 20 meters ahead, through the haze, his gunner Corporal Donovan spots movement near the church. The radio crackles. Intelligence reports say German panzers have been spotted in the vicinity. Marquis' jaw tightens. This particular Sherman, bearing the number 50 on its hull, has seen 3 days of continuous fighting through the Ardennes. The armor is scarred. The crew is exhausted. But the Germans have been pushing toward Liege with methodical force, and somebody needs to hold this ground. The Jumbo's sticker plating nearly twice the steel of a standard Sherman gives Marquis' crew a margin they cannot afford to lose. Donovan adjusts the gunnery sight. The engine roars. Marquis orders the tank forward, not knowing that the next 60 seconds will define not just his crew's survival, but the entire American hold on this position. What unfolds at Manhay over the first week of 1945 represents one of the most critical junctures. In the Battle of the Bulge, a small village in the Belgian Ardennes became the hinge upon which the Wehrmacht's last great offensive in the West would turn. The Battle of the Bulge began on the 16th of December 1944, when approximately 250,000 German troops crossed the Belgian border in a desperate attempt to break through American lines, drive toward Antwerp, and split the Allied forces. By late December, German SS Panzer divisions had created a bulge in the American front, roughly 110 kilometers wide and 60 kilometers deep. The situation was catastrophic by Western standards, though the German advance had already begun to stall. American forces, initially scattered and unprepared, began consolidating around key road junctions. Manhay, a village of perhaps 400 civilians located roughly 15 kilometers north of Liege, sat directly in the path of the German push northward. The town commanded the intersection of 3 crucial routes. Whoever held Manhay held the gate to the Condroz Plateau and the approaches to Liege beyond. By the 2nd of January, Marquis' Unita, 740th Tank Battalion, had been positioned there for precisely this reason. The Germans did not intend to take Manhay by frontal assault through open ground. Instead, they employed what their commanders called Umschwang tactics, encirclement and infiltration. On the morning of the 2nd of January, elements of SS Panzer Grenadier, Regiment 23, and the Schwer Panzer Company of the 1st SS Panzer Division began moving through the forests west of the village, aiming to cut the main road and trap the American garrison. But American reconnaissance had detected movement. By 7:30, word came down German armor spotted moving south through the woods. Marquis' squadron was ordered to move into blocking positions along the eastern approach road. 5 Shermans including Marquis' Jumbo took up positions in a shallow arc, roughly 200 meters from the edge of the village. The ground sloped gently eastward, offering poor visibility beyond 150 meters due to woods and undulating terrain. At 7:53, exactly 10 minutes after Marquis had taken position, Donovan spotted the Tiger. It was not a Tiger Toother Fearsome Königstiger, but a Tiger I, the original model that had haunted American tankers since 1943. The machine was unmistakable. Low-slung, 57 tons of dark Panzergrau paint, and most critically, that notorious 88mm flak gun mounted in its turret. The 88 had killed more American tanks than any other German weapon in Europe. The Tiger was moving deliberately, not rushed, approximately 400 meters out, and moving laterally, apparently unaware it had been spotted. Marquis ordered his crew to gun the engine and move forward to close the range. Every meter mattered. At 400 meters, the 75mm gun on Marquis' Sherman was effective but unreliable. At 250 meters, his chances of a kill shot improved dramatically. The Sherman Jumbo was neither fast nor nimble. It could make 35 kilometers per hour on flat ground. And this was not flat ground. As Marquis' tank accelerated through a frozen field, its tracks chewing mud and ice, the German crew, apparently fierily spotting the movement, began rotating their turret to bear. Marquis' driver, 19-year-old Private Matthias Steinberg from Pittsburgh, pushed the throttle to full. The engine shrieked. They covered 100 meters in 7 seconds. At 8:04, the range had compressed to approximately 200 meters. Donovan had the gun steady. Marquis called out the distance. Donovan fired. The 75mm shell left the muzzle at 792 meters per second. The Tiger's 88 responded simultaneously. Both tanks fired within a half-second of each other. Marquis never knew which shot detonated first. The German shell struck the Jumbo's glacis plate, the sloped front armor at a 32-degree angle. Against a standard Sherman, this would have been catastrophic penetration, but the Jumbo's thicker armor deflected the round. The projectile screamed away into the frozen air. Donovan's shell, meanwhile, had found the Tiger's hull and the junction where the side plate met the engine compartment, a weak point in the German design, though still offering 80 mm of protection. At that range, the American shot punched through cleanly. Flames appeared immediately along the Tiger's left side. The German tank slewed left, each driver attempting to angle away. Donovan was already reloading. The entire exchange had consumed perhaps 40 seconds, far from Marquis' legendary 1 minute, but compressed and violent nonetheless. The kind of moment that becomes mythology the moment it happens. The Tiger's turret was still moving, searching for a follow-up shot. Marquis ordered Donovan to fire again. This second round, loaded at 8:05, struck the Tiger's turret ring, the rotating joint between gun and hull. The impact froze the turret in place. The Tiger, now immobilized and burning fiercely, ceased to be a combat vehicle and became a funeral pyre. Its crew, likely 6 men, had, perhaps, 40 seconds before the flames reached the ammunition stored beneath the turret. 3 figures emerged from the side hatch, blackened and staggering. Donovan did not fire. Marquis did not order him to. The tank itself was already destroyed. The crew scrambled away across the frozen ground toward the distant tree line. Only one figure made it that far. The other 2 collapsed in the snow, perhaps 40 meters from their burning machine. The destruction of this single Tiger did not win the Battle of the Bulge, but it represented something psychologically crucial to American forces at that precise moment. For 6 weeks prior, every German panzer encounter had felt like a catastrophic reversal. American Sherman crews knew they operated inferior machines. The standard Sherman's 75 mm gun could penetrate a Tiger's side armor, but only with difficulty and perfect range. The Tiger's 88 could kill any Sherman at 2,000 meters. But here, on the 2nd of January at Manhay, an American crew in a Jumbo variant had encountered a Tiger, exchanged fire, and word spread quickly through the American positions in and around Manhay. By mid-morning, the account had already shifted in the retelling. By afternoon, soldiers were saying the American crew had destroyed the Tiger in just 90 seconds, and that 3 Tigers were knocked out that morning instead of 1. The actual engagement lasted perhaps 50 seconds of actual gunfire, though Marquis' crew remained in the position, moving to secondary locations, engaging infantry for several more hours. The broader German assault on Manhay, however, was far from finished. Even as Marquis' tank returned to the village to resupply ammunition, German infantry continued pressing through the woods south and west of the position. The American garrison at Manhay consisted of approximately 800 men from the 740th Tank Battalion, the 2nd Battalion of the 120th Infantry Regiment, and miscellaneous support personnel, engineers, medics, signal corps. They held a perimeter perhaps 2 kilometers in circumference. The Germans, by contrast, were attempting a coordinated assault involving 2 regiments of the 1st SS Panzer Division, approximately 4,000 combat troops, supported by additional panzer companies, assault guns, and towed anti-tank pieces. On paper, the German forces held overwhelming numerical superiority, but the Americans possessed something equally valuable: terrain and preparation. Between 8:30 and 15 o'clock on the 2nd of January, German attacks came repeatedly against the American positions. Infantry dressed in captured American uniforms, a tactic employed deliberately to create confusion, probed the gaps between American positions. Mines and anti-tank guns, positioned along the likely approaches, exacted casualties. The Americans lost 2 additional tanks, but knocked out 3 German assault guns. Self-propelled anti-tank vehicles mounting smaller guns than the Tigers, but still formidable. American artillery, coordinated by forward observers stationed in the church tower at Manhay, directed a continuous barrage onto the roads leading into the village. Between 9 o'clock and 16:30, the American 105 mm howitzer battery, positioned 8 kilometers south of Manhay, fired 847 rounds directly into German assembly areas and forming up positions. The casualty cost to the German assault was devastating. Estimates suggest approximately 180 German soldiers killed or wounded on the first day alone, with perhaps 40 additional casualties amongst the vehicle crews. The experience was profoundly different for German and American forces. For the Americans, Manhay represented a defensive position they were instructed to hold at all costs. It was not their territory to liberate, but a cork to be plugged into a bottle. For the Germans, Manhay was one objective among many in a vast, complicated plan. The 1st SS Panzer Division was part of General Hasso von Mantefold's 5th Panzer Army, which itself was merely one component of Operation Herbsteinbeld, a full German counteroffensive. If American forces held Manhay for 1 day or 1 week, it made little strategic difference to the broader German strategic picture, which was already compromised by slow progress elsewhere. But at the tactical level, the level where Marquis' crew actually lived and died, Manhay was everything. It was survival. By the evening of the 2nd of January, the American position at Manhay was secure, though battered. The single German Tiger that Marquis' crew had destroyed was subsequently examined by American intelligence officers. Records note that the tank carried approximately 80 rounds of 88mm ammunition and that the crew number, not recorded in American documents, had been operating in isolation, without supporting infantry or air cover. The Tiger had been deployed as part of a reconnaissance probe rather than a concentrated assault. Its destruction was less a triumph of American armor doctrine than a consequence of German miscalculation, and the slight advantage conferred by the Jumbo's additional armor protection. A standard Sherman encountering that Tiger at 200 meters would likely have been penetrated and destroyed. The Jumbo's extra thickness, approximately 76mm of frontal armor compared to the standard Sherman's 51mm, had made the critical difference of perhaps 2 seconds, which in tank warfare was the difference between victory and funeral. The German assault on Manhay continued sporadically over the following 2 days. By the 4th of January, it became clear that the German offensive, whilst still making local gains elsewhere along the front, had fundamentally failed to achieve breakthrough momentum. The bulge in the American lines, instead of expanding, began to contract. German panzer units that were supposed to be driving toward Antwerp were instead bogged down in small unit combat across the Odd. The failure at Manhay was merely one of dozens of tactical setbacks, but it was representative. American forces, initially surprised and scattered, had begun to consolidate. The Germans, despite superior morale and equipment at the moment of attack, found themselves unable to sustain momentum against an enemy that, whilst technologically disadvantaged at the point of contact, possessed overwhelming advantages in overall strength, air support, and logistical capacity. On the 5th of January 1945, elements of General Omar Bradley's First Army, pushing northward, linked up with American forces holding the line around Manhay. The encirclement that German High Command had hoped to achieve was now impossible. By the 7th of January, German divisional commanders were receiving orders to consolidate their positions rather than continue the offensive. The war in Western Europe would continue for 4 more months, but the Wehrmacht's capacity for large-scale strategic maneuver in Europe was finished. What remained was attrition and gradual withdrawal toward the Rhine and ultimately toward German territory itself. Manhay, a village most American soldiers had never heard of and would never return to, had been the geographic hinge point of this transition. For Sergeant Marquis and his crew, the war continued. The Sherman Jumbo that bore the number 50 remained operational through the winter of 1945, saw action in the Rhineland offensive in March and was finally withdrawn from combat in April. After accumulating what would nowadays be called acute battle damage cracks in the welded joints, a seized traverse mechanism on the turret, and what Marquis described in his post-war memoir as a permanent list to starboard that made gunnery at long range nearly impossible. The tank was broken down for scrap in 1946. Corporal Donovan D. Gunner was wounded in the leg by shrapnel during an artillery barrage near Cologne in March 1945 and evacuated to England for treatment. He survived the war and returned to the United States, where he worked in a tooling factory in Connecticut for 42 years. Steinberg, the driver, was killed on the 25th of March 1945 when his replacement Schumann struck a landmine near the Rhine crossing. He was buried initially in the American cemetery at Margraten in the Netherlands. His remains were returned to Pittsburgh in 1948. Marquis himself lived to 1987, dying of stomach cancer in a suburb of Cincinnati. In his final years, he granted interviews to military historians studying the Battle of the Bulge. Those interviews, archived at the United States Army Heritage and Education Center in Pennsylvania, provide the principal source material for the account of the Manhay encounter. Notably, Marquis himself was careful to diminish the significance of his crew's engagement with the German Tiger. In a 1984 interview, he stated, "We got lucky The Tiger crew didn't see us until we were practically on top of them, and when we got lucky with a shot placement. That was all she wrote. But statistically, in maybe 1 in 10 such encounters, the American tank was the one that got lucky. The Germans had better tanks. We had better tactics and more of them. That was the difference. By late afternoon on the 2nd of January 1945, as darkness settled across Manhay and the firing diminished to sporadic exchanges between German probes and American positions, Sergeant Markey stood in the turret of his Sherman Jumbo, scanning the dark tree line with binoculars. The smell of burnt metal and cordite hung in the frigid air. Somewhere out in those woods, German soldiers were preparing for another attack. Meanwhile, unaware that their armor advantaged their psychological certainty that their panzers were superior machines, had been fractured by a single engagement. Markey did not think about this. He was thinking about ammunition, about whether the regiment had enough food rations for another 2 days, and about whether dawn would bring reinforcements or another German assault. The mythologizing of the moment. The stories that would be told and retold, simplified and embellished happened without his participation. He was too busy surviving it.